Welcome to another installment of Awful Victorian Era Criminals. We've got another fun mix today, so I hope y'all are ready for more serial killers, family enders, people eaters, and more. We're kicking off today's list with William Burke and William Hare, who were two Irish immigrants who became the most famous body snatchers in history. They began their criminal careers by selling the corpse of a deceased man who lived in their boarding house to Robert Knox of the Edinburgh Medical College, supposedly because the man owed them money. However, the two quickly saw that there was quite a demand for cadavers and that there was easy money to be made in providing them. So they would ultimately kill at least, 17 victims. They started with tenants in their boarding house and then moved on to women of the night and strangers on the streets. Their preferred method of killing was, hands around the neck, which became known as Burking. Interestingly enough, Burke was the only one who received the rope necklace of death in the end. Hare testified against him and was granted immunity. Burke was also publicly dissected before his skin was used to make a book, which is now housed in the Police Museum on the Royal Mile. These grisly crimes, and others like them, actually resulted in the 1832 Anatomy Act, which changed the laws regarding dissections and the acquiring of bodies in order to combat the lucrative trade in cadavers in the UK. Dr. Neill Cream is another notable Victorian killer and would become known for botched surgeries and liberal use of poison. He got his start in Canada and Chicago, performing life and career-saving surgeries for the world's oldest profession. However, he eventually moved on to killing wealthy members of society. He was a suspect in a number of deaths, but always managed to escape conviction, until his lover turned on him for the death of her husband. He served several years in prison, but was released early, probably because of bribery. He then returned to London, where he had been enrolled in graduate studies years earlier, and eventually settled in Lambeth, and promptly killed 4 of the night with something poison. He was arrested due to his own arrogant and stupid actions, tried, and convicted as the Lambeth Poisoner. He was executed shortly after the trial on November 15th of 1892. Now, many ripperologists have attempted to tie Dr. Cream to Jack the Ripper due to his supposed final words saying, "I am Jack." However, the Ripper killings occurred when Cream was in jail in Illinois and he was suffering from advanced syphilis, so his final words can likely be chalked up to his mental instability at the time. Or just delusions. John Liver-Eating Johnson was born in Little York, New Jersey, and served in the Mexican-American War well under the legal age. After striking an officer, he left the army and went west to pursue gold digging. Well, at some point, he developed a vendetta against the Crow tribe, and during his lifetime scalped and killed about 300 people. He got the nickname Liver-Eating because he would cut out and eat the liver of every person he killed. Yeah, what a charmer. Now flash forward, after his passing, years later, in 1972, legendary actor Robert Redford actually portrayed him in the film Jeremiah Johnson, which had a pretty good run. Wild Bill Longley was born in Austin County, Texas, and spent his formative years learning how to use a firearm. And in 1868, he committed his first crime, killing a former slave traveling through town. In 1870, he committed to spend 5 years in the army, but left in 1872. By 1873, he was back in Texas and was accused of killing another freedman. By 1875, he fired and killed his lifelong best friend and fled town. He committed another killing in 1876, and in that same year became a sharecropper for a preacher, whom, you guessed it, he later killed. He was arrested in 1877 and went the way of the rope necklace in 1878. He was arrested in 1877 and was executed in 1878. Now, flash forward to the future, Steve McQueen portrayed him in an episode of Tales of Wells Fargo. The Bender family, more well known as the Bloody Benders, were a family of serial killers in Labette County, Kansas, in the States that operated between May of 1871 to December of 1872. The family supposedly consisted of John Bender, his wife Elvira, their son John Jr., and their daughter Kate. Contemporary newspaper accounts reported that the Benders' neighbors claimed John and Kate were actually husband and wife, possibly via a common law marriage. Estimates reported that the Benders killed at least a dozen travelers, and perhaps as many as 20 before they were discovered. Now, the family's fate remains unknown, with theories ranging from, a lot of things to maybe making it out alive. A lot of folklore and legends surround the Benders, making it kind of hard to separate fact from fiction. So what did they do? It's believed that when a guest stayed at their bed and breakfast inn, the host would get the guest a seat of honor at the table that was positioned over a trap door into the cellar. With the victim's back to the curtain, Kate would distract the guest while John, or his son, came out from behind the curtain and struck the guest on the right side of the skull with a hammer. One of the women would, cut the victim's throat to ensure death, and then the body was dropped through the trap door. Once in the cellar, body would be stripped, later buried somewhere on the property, often in the orchard, good fertilizer. Although some of the victims were wealthy, others carried little of value, and it's believed the family just killed for the fun of it. So, what happened to them in the end? Well, detectives following wagon tracks discovered the Benders' wagon, abandoned with a starving team of horses, just outside the city limits of Hare, which was about 12 miles north of the inn. It was confirmed that the family had bought tickets on the railroad. They were headed for Humboldt, but they didn't make it all the way there. At one point, John Jr. and Kate left the train and caught another train south because they were planning on heading to Denison, Texas. But Nobody knows, never found them ever again. Jane Toppan was born in Boston, Massachusetts, and was given up for adoption by her father to an orphanage. She was taken in as an indentured servant to a local family, and by 1885 she was training to become a nurse. Well, she began harming her patients early on, and after being fired, became a private nurse. She began poisoning her victims in 1895, killing her landlord, her foster sister, several of her patients, and their family members. Toxicology reports were eventually made on some of her victims, and when poison was found, yeah, our girl was suspected. She was arrested in 1901, and by 1902 she'd confessed to killing about 32 people. She went to trial, but was found not guilty for reasons of insanity, and was committed to life at the Taunton State Hospital. Belle Gunness was born in Selbu, Norway, and she moved to the United States by the age of 22. She married her first husband in 1884, and they owned a candy store, but it later burned down. The couple collected life insurance on their business after the fire, and eventually, afterwards, they gave birth to 2 descendants, both of whom died from inflammation of the large intestine, which that can occur from poisoning. Well, Belle collected insurance checks from both of these deaths, and in 1890 she put out a life insurance policy on her husband, and he died that same day, prompting her to move to Indiana and buy a pig farm. By 1892 she married her second husband, and a week later his daughter died in her care. About 8 months after the wedding, Belle's second husband died from a skull injury, and yep, you guessed it, she collected his life insurance. In 1905 she began placing marriage ads in Chicago papers, and when they were answered, a lot of those guys went missing. In 1908 her farm burned down, and upon investigation, I think about 11 bodies were found. Now initially one of the bodies was suspected to be her, but it was considerably shorter and lighter than she was. Now it was never officially determined whether or not she had died in the fire or escaped, but she did claim at least 14 victims on her farm. And by the way, most of those bodies were severely mutilated, with the limbs and the heads severed from the torsos. The Kelly family was an American family of serial killers who operated between August and December of 1887 near a town called Oak City, just south of the Kansas state border in no man's land, now the Oklahoma Panhandle. The family consisted of William Kelly, his wife Kate, his son Bill, also called Billy, and daughter Kit. Now originally from Pennsylvania, the family is believed to have killed at least 11 wealthy travelers. According to the 55-year-old William Kelly's confession, he and his family moved from the Pennsylvania mountains to Kansas in 1869. They moved around to different places along the southern border until eventually settling in no man's land, which is about 25 miles from Beaver. Initially dealing with cattle, the Kellys soon opened a tavern where they housed fellow cattlers and travelers. But in the span of a couple of months, a number of people had disappeared mysteriously along the road leading to the tavern. Now despite all of this, nobody actually suspected the family of doing anything until about December of 1887, when the occupants suddenly left the house without notifying anybody. A short while afterwards, a traveler from St. Louis named S.T. Gregg, who had visited the tavern before, decided to stop by, check the house. Upon entry, quite a foul stench overtook him, coming from a hidden cellar underneath the house. Now the bodies of 3 men, already in an advanced state of decomposition, were discovered, as well as a trapdoor under the tavern's floor. Soon after the discoveries, information from Beaver came through that all 4 of the Kelly family had passed through town a couple of days ago, allegedly en route to New Mexico. A posse of about 20 men was quickly organized, and the family's trail led to Palo Duro Creek, from where it appeared that their route had changed towards Wheeler, Texas. After a while, the posse caught up with them and engaged in a 2-hour-long chase. Eventually, Kate Kelly's horse tripped and Kate fell to the ground, breaking her neck in the process, so she was left behind. And about a half an hour later, the vigilantes caught up with Bill and Kit, but William managed to escape. Upon capture, Kit began pleading for mercy, only to be told off by her brother for being as complicit in the killings as he was. Yeah, you guessed it, that was the end of the family. Dr. William Palmer was convicted of killing by poisoning in one of the most famous cases of the 1800s. After completing his medical training, which was constantly affected by nefarious activities, he returned to his hometown to open a medical practice. Shortly after his wedding and the birth of his first descendant, a number of individuals surrounding Dr. Palmer died, often in his presence. That includes his next 4 offspring, his mother-in-law, individuals who he owed money to, his wife, his brother, his uncle, and several of his illegitimate descendants. Now the death of his brother was investigated, but his involvement couldn't be proven. He only found himself in trouble after the suspicious death of a gambling buddy who fell ill after dining with him. The guy had won a large sum of money, which Palmer collected for him and then used to pay off his own debts. After a post-mortem revealed that Cook had been poisoned, Palmer was arrested, tried, and convicted, largely on circumstantial evidence. He was dubbed Palmer the Poisoner and went the way of the rope necklace in front of a 30,000-member crowd in June of 1856. Now his trial made headlines because it was the first to be moved away from an outlying jurisdiction because they wanted him to get a fair trial. Adelaide Blanche Bartlett was accused, tried, and acquitted of her husband's death in 1886. Now, while she isn't the only woman in history accused of killing somebody, the way he died, it makes the crime famous. So after encouraging her relationship with another man, Edwin, the husband, was found dead and later discovered to have about a 1/16 of an ounce of chloroform in his stomach. Now, this is unusual because chloroform is a corrosive substance, and swallowing that much would have induced upchucking. There also would have been trace amounts of the substance and burns left behind in his mouth or on his throat, and none of those were found. Even though Adelaide's lover had purchased 4 small bottles of chloroform just prior to the husband's death, her defense claimed that the guy had drunk the chloroform himself and taken his own life. And because there was no evidence to prove how the poison had been administered, Adelaide was acquitted. She made headlines during the trial, but disappeared from society once that was over. One famous doctor at the time is quoted as saying that, hey, in the interest of science, she should say how she did it. Well, if she did do it, she took it to her grave. And that's it for me once again, folks. I've been Alexa, your resident emo girly. See y'all next time I buzz in over here at Bumblebee.